If I started investing from $0 today, right now, with nothing in the bank, here is exactly what I would do in order. And I'm not going to waste your time getting there. Most of what gets thrown around online about investing is either too complicated to actually use or so watered down it's useless. I've spent over 4 decades doing this for a living, making calls on stocks, currencies, interest rates, sometimes with more money on the line in a single trade than most people will earn in their entire life. And I have been wrong. A lot, probably more than you'd guess if you only know the highlight reel. The reason I'm still standing, the reason I didn't get wiped out in '87 or in 2000 or in '08 like so many smart people did, comes down to maybe 5 or 6 rules. That's it. Not 50. Not some secret system. A handful of things I had to learn, mostly the hard way, usually by losing money first and figuring out why afterward. If you walk away from this video and skip what I'm about to say, you're going to make the exact mistakes I made in my 20s, and it's going to cost you years, not dollars, years. So stick with me for the next half hour because I'm going to tell you what I'd actually do, not what sounds good on a slide. Before I get into it, I want to ask you for something, and I'll be straight about why. What I'm walking you through took me most of a career to piece together, and there are people out there charging real money, thousands of dollars a year, to explain a worse version of it. I'm giving it to you for nothing. All I'd ask is you hit subscribe before you keep watching, mostly because later videos build on what I say today, and if you're not subscribed, you probably won't see them show up. Costs you nothing, might save you a decade of doing this wrong. All right, let's get into the first move, and this has nothing to do with picking a stock yet, is fixing what's going on between your ears. Because I'd say this whole business is 90% psychology and maybe 10% actually finding the right thing to. Nearly everyone has that backwards. They think the game is finding the next apple or the next hot little coin somebody's cousin mentioned at dinner. I've sat in rooms with some of the sharpest analysts on the planet, guys with access to information you'll never see, and plenty of them still lose money because when the trade turns against them, they can't control themselves. So rule one, and I mean this literally, you are not trying to be right every time. You are trying to make more when you're right than you lose when you're wrong. I've had years where I was only correct on maybe 4 out of every 10 calls, and it was one of the best years of my career because the ones I got right big, and the ones I got wrong, I got out of fast and small. If you take one thing from this whole video, take that sentence. It isn't about your batting average. It's about the size of your wins against the size of your losses. Somebody starting today with $50 who actually understands that will beat a genius who doesn't. Every single time, given enough years. Now that the mindset part is out of the way, here's the actual starting point. And it has nothing to do with the stock market yet, which surprises people. Before a single dollar goes into any investment, you need somewhere between 3 and 6 months of your bare living expenses sitting in cash. Somewhere boring, a savings account paying decent interest, nothing fancy. I know that's not the exciting part of the video, but I've watched talented, capable people get forced to sell their best positions at the absolute worst moment because their car broke down or they got laid off and had zero cushion. When you're forced to sell, you've lost control of the situation, and markets have an ugly habit of falling apart at exactly the moment you personally need cash the most. So step one is unglamorous, build the cushion first. I grew up in a working class household in Michigan. My father didn't have some deep reserve to fall back on, and I watched up close what that kind of pressure does to a person's decision making. It makes you desperate, and desperate money makes bad choices almost every single time. Don't let that be you, no matter how tempting the next hot idea looks, once that cushion actually exists. Here's where I'd put the first real dollars to work. And I'll be honest, it's boring. And it's supposed to be with zero experience. Your money should go into a broad index fund, something that owns a small sliver of hundreds of the biggest companies in the country all at once. I know that isn't the answer people want. They want the next Amazon before they've even opened a brokerage account. But here's the truth. When I was starting out, I didn't have an edge yet. An edge is some piece of insight or some way of thinking that the rest of the crowd hasn't caught on to. You don't walk in the door with an edge. You build one slowly over years of paying attention and watching how markets actually behave, which is usually nothing like how people assume they behave. So for your first year, maybe your first two or three, your job isn't to get rich. Your job is to get money into something broad, consistently, every paycheck if you can manage it, and let time do the heavy lifting while you're busy learning everything else. Let me put a number on this because it doesn't land the same without one in. Picture two people, both 25, both starting from nothing. One waits until 35 because she wants to feel settled first, pay off the car, take a couple trips, get comfortable. From 35 to 65, she puts in $200 a month, never misses. The other one starts at 25, puts in half as much, $100 a month, but she starts a full decade earlier and never stops. Run the math on that with a reasonable long-term return, and the person who started earlier with less money ends up ahead of the person who waited and doubled her contribution. Not by a hair either. That isn't some trick. That's just what compounding does when you give it enough time. Nobody feels rich putting in $100 a month. In year one, it can feel almost pointless, honestly. But you're not doing this for year one. You're doing it so that by year 30, the thing you built quietly, without noticing, has become the single biggest asset you own. Bigger than the car, bigger than the house for a lot of people, built almost entirely from money you barely felt leaving your account each month. While that money sits and compounds in the background, your actual job, the one that matters most, is building the edge I mentioned earlier. And this is exactly where most people quit before they've even started. Building an edge means reading, and I don't mean skimming headlines on your phone between meetings. I mean actual company reports, actual economic data, actual history of how markets behave the last several times things got ugly or euphoric. I used to read constantly because a market is basically a giant machine trying to guess the future, and your job is understanding some piece of that puzzle better than whoever's on the other side of your trade. You don't need a finance degree for this, not even close. Some of the best investors I've crossed paths with over the years never set foot in a business school. What they had instead was a stubborn, almost annoying curiosity. They wanted to know why rates were moving, why one industry was quietly struggling, while another was booming, why the crowd had convinced itself of something that fell apart the second you actually looked at the numbers. Here's something practical, something you could genuinely start this week. Pick one industry you already understand from ordinary life, something you interact with as a regular customer, whether that's retail, restaurants, cars, banking, doesn't matter which. You've already got a head start there because you have real world experience. Most professional analysts sitting in a glass tower simply don't have. Start following the handful of companies in that space. Read their updates when they come out. Notice which ones are actually growing their profits and which ones are only growing their story. Watch how the stock reacts the day after they report. And more importantly, ask yourself why. Did it match the actual numbers? Or did it react to something else entirely, some mood in the room that had nothing to do with the business itself? Do this quietly for a full year before you ever put serious money behind an opinion in that space. Markets are a tangle of real information and pure emotion. And your entire job as an investor is slowly learning to tell those two apart. Nobody hands you that skill in a headline. You earn it watching the same handful of names for months until patterns start showing up that nobody bothered pointing out to you. I'll give you an example from my own early years because it's a little embarrassing, but it makes the point. I once got excited about a company purely because everybody around me was talking about it at dinners, in the office, on the train. I hadn't actually done the reading. I hadn't looked at what the business was earning, only at how loud the conversation around it had gotten. It didn't go well, and it shouldn't have gone well, because I skipped the entire step of actually understanding what I was buying. That mistake taught me more than most of my wins did. Noise is not the same as knowledge, and the louder a room gets about something, the more suspicious you should probably be, not less. I'd also tell you to pay attention to the bigger picture, not just individual companies, because this took me years to fully appreciate and it changed the whole shape of my career. Interest rates, inflation, what central banks are doing. These things move almost everything underneath the surface, even businesses that seem to have nothing to do with any of it. You don't need to become an economist, but you do need to grasp at a basic level that when borrowing money gets more expensive, nearly everything in the economy slows down a little. And when it gets cheaper, things speed back up. Beginners obsess endlessly over picking the one perfect stock while completely ignoring the tide that's either lifting or sinking every single boat in the water at the same time. Learn to notice the tide first. It'll save you from a long list of bad individual decisions down the road. Now let's talk about risk, because I've watched more good people get wiped out here than anywhere else in this business, and it's the part of my own career I'm proudest of getting right, even in years when the actual bet itself was wrong. The rule is simple to say and brutally hard to live by. Never risk your ability to keep playing this game for the chance of getting rich a little faster. Doesn't matter how good the opportunity looks. I walked away from trades I was almost certain would work, because if I turned out to be wrong, the downside would have ended my ability to keep showing up the next day. That's the part people skip past. It's not about squeezing every last opportunity. It's about staying in the game long enough for your good decisions to actually add up over time. So practically, for someone starting from zero, that means never putting money into a single investment you couldn't stomach watching drop by half without panicking, or needing that exact cash for something urgent. It means deciding ahead of time how much of your total pile you're willing to risk on any one idea, even an idea you love, even one you're sure about. I've watched genuinely brilliant people dump too much of their savings into one stock because they were certain, and certain people get destroyed just as often as uncertain ones, sometimes worse, because certainty makes you stop watching for the warning signs entirely. There's also a version of this that has nothing to do with a single bad stock and everything to do with borrowed money. Leverage, using debt to make your bets bigger, can turn a decent idea into a life-changing one, and it can just as easily turn a small mistake into a total wipeout. I've seen it happen to people far smarter than me. They weren't wrong about the underlying idea. Not really. They were just too big, too leveraged, and the market gave them no time to be patient before it forced them out at the worst possible price. If you're starting from zero today, I'd tell you to leave leverage alone entirely for a long while. There is no rush. The version of you 5 years from now, who actually understands what she's doing, will decide if and when leverage ever makes sense. The version of you today does not need it, and honestly, probably shouldn't touch it. I remember fairly early on being completely convinced about a position, having done real work on it, believing the whole thesis, and then watching it move against me almost immediately. Every bit of pride in me wanted to hold on, wanted to prove I'd been right all along. But I had a rule, and for once I followed the rule instead of my ego, and I got out with a small loss. Not 2 weeks later, new information came out that would have turned that small loss into something genuinely painful had I stayed purely out of stubbornness. That one decision, following a boring rule instead of my own pride, probably saved me more money over the years than any single brilliant idea I ever came up with. Beginners think the goal is never being wrong. People who've actually been through a few cycles know the goal is being wrong, cheaply and often. So you're still standing when the rare big right call comes along and makes up for all the rest several times over. Once you've got a few years of consistent, boring investing behind you, once you've built real understanding through reading and genuine attention, and once you've actually proven to yourself, not just told yourself, that you can follow risk rules even when it's uncomfortable, that's when I'd start allowing slightly more concentrated bets. That means putting a larger chunk of money into a smaller number of ideas you've done real work on and genuinely understand better than most of the crowd does. This is not a year one move. This is something you earn after proving you can handle the disciplined version first. The biggest gains of my career came from moments I'd done enormous amounts of homework, understood something the broader market hadn't caught on to yet, and was willing to put real capital behind that conviction, all while still respecting the rule about cutting losses fast if it turned out I was wrong. Patience for years, then aggression at exactly the right moment, backed by real preparation, That's the actual formula. It won't make for a punchy 30-second clip, but it's the truth. And I'd rather give you the truth than something that sounds good in your head and leaves you broke in your account. Notice the order there, because people love skipping straight to the bold part without doing any of the patient parts first. They watch someone talk about a big concentrated bet and assume that's where they should start with their first $1,000. That's backwards, and it's exactly how beginners turn a small stake into nothing. The concentration only works because it's sitting on top of tiers of broad, boring investing and genuine study underneath it. Without that foundation, a concentrated bet isn't conviction. It's gambling wearing a nicer suit. You are in the right to be bold. Nobody hands it to you, and you shouldn't be handing it to yourself before you've actually earned it either. One more thing nobody tells beginners, and I think it might matter more than everything else combined. You are going to be wrong plenty of times, and that's completely fine as long as you're wrong small. I've made calls that lost real money. I've had humbling stretches in my career, more than one. The difference between me and someone who quit or went broke is that I never let a single wrong call threaten the whole pile. Before you put money into anything, ask yourself this question every time, no exceptions. If I'm completely wrong about this, what actually happens to me? If the honest answer is that it would meaningfully hurt your life, your ability to cover rent, your ability to sleep at night, then the position's too big, no matter how good the story sounds. Shrink it down until the honest answer is that you'd be disappointed. But fine. That single habit, run before every decision, will keep you in the game long enough to build real wealth, while the people who skip that question end up starting over from zero, sometimes more than once, because they never learned to respect what could go wrong before they got excited about what might go right. There's a quieter version of this same mistake nobody talks about much, which is refusing to admit you were wrong even after the evidence is sitting right there in front of you. I've watched sharp people hold a losing position for months, not because the facts still supported it, but because admitting they were wrong felt like admitting something about themselves, not just about a trade. Your investments don't know who you are. They don't care how confident you sounded when you first bought in, or how good the thesis felt on paper. The second the facts change, you have to be willing to change your mind without shame, without some long drawn-out negotiation with yourself. The investors who last decades aren't the ones who are right. Most often, they're the ones who look at new information, admit the old plan doesn't hold up anymore, and act on it immediately, instead of a week later or a month later, once the damage has already piled up around them. I'll say this plainly because I think it needs saying. Some of my worst stretches were not about missing an opportunity. They were about knowing, somewhere in the back of my mind, that a position had gone bad, and taking too long to admit it because I'd already told people, or myself, how confident I was. Ego is expensive in this business, more expensive than almost anything else. The people who last the longest are usually not the loudest ones in the room. They're the ones quietly willing to say out loud, I was wrong about that. Let's move on, without treating it as some personal defeat. So here's the actual challenge. And I want you doing this today, not next week, not once you feel more ready. Because you'll never feel fully ready, and that's completely normal. Open whatever account you use, or if you don't have one yet, go open a simple brokerage account this afternoon, put your first dollars in, even if it's $50, into a broad index fund. Set up an automatic transfer so a piece of every paycheck goes in without you having to think about it or talk yourself out of it later on. Then commit to reading real financial history and real company information for 30 minutes a day, every day for the next year. While that money sits quietly compounding in the background, don't chase the hot tip. Don't put money into anything you can't explain clearly to another person in under a minute. And decide right now, before there's a single real dollar on the line, that you'll cut your losses quickly and let the winners run. Because that decision is easy to make today and brutally hard once actual money and actual emotions get involved. Do these things consistently for years, not weeks, and you'll end up somewhere completely different financially than almost everyone around you, not because you found some secret stock nobody else knew about, but because you did the boring, disciplined work that almost nobody has the patience for. Start today. Put the exact amount you're putting in this week in the comments below, because writing it down where other people can see it makes you far more likely to actually follow through. I'll see you in the next one.